Hello and welcome to today's webinar on Advanced DNN Theming. I am Clint Patterson, Ecosystem Manager here at DNN Corp, and I am joined by the NV Quick crew here. So we'll talk about the agenda, and then the sooner I'm quiet, the quicker you guys will start learning some more. So David, if you could go ahead and click to the next slide. All right, so as far as the agenda, I'm not going to read every single item. This is just letting you know where we're going here in the webinar. And again, this is the Advanced Theming webinar. A couple of weeks ago, we had a Intro to Theming or Theming Basics webinar. So if you're here and you feel some of this content may be a little bit above your head, feel free to go watch the replay of the Intro to Theming webinar, which is on our community blog page. But as far as the agenda, we're going to do introductions to David and TK next. Then we're going to look at just some of the basics of DNN theming. We're going to do some comparisons and look at kind of how theming has gone or been in DNN up until now. And then we're going to talk about why. Why do we need to change the way we're doing our themes or theming process? Then we'll get into some tools, and then we'll kind of roll into the actual code, which is what most people are here for today. As far as the questions, in your GoToWebinar software, which I see everybody here, most of you are familiar with GoToWebinar software, but if you're not, you can expand the panel that says questions. And if you have a question, feel free to ask that question at any moment throughout the webinar. We will answer questions as we can during the webinar, and then at the end of the webinar, we will answer all of the questions. So that's pretty much the ground rules. And David, TK, thanks for donating your time here to the ecosystem, and I'll let you guys take it from here.
Well, Clint, thanks for having us on here. We're real excited about presenting to you today and sharing a little bit about some tooling that we have made for ourselves and also made available for the community at large here. I am David Poindexter, and I'm the CEO of Envisionative. We are a full-service creative marketing and app development company based out of just north of Charlotte, North Carolina area. We're in Race City, USA, so we've got our fine dose of race activity around here, and most of the race teams are based here. I am co-president of the Southern Fried DNN user group based out of Charlotte, and I'm on the board of directors of DNN Connect, and I'm also the lead for the Partners Ecosystem Advisory Group. So that's a little bit about me. You'll see our Twitter handle and Facebook and Instagram down at the bottom, and I'll turn it over to TK for him to introduce himself.
Hello everyone, I'm TK Shepard. I'm a web dev here at Envisionative. I'm also a member of the Southern Fried DNN user group and co-creator of NV Quick Theme.
Thank you, TK. So we're going to jump right into it today, and while this webinar is entitled Advanced Theming, we do need to cover a little bit of basics to get us going, because we want to provide some context here as to why we're making the recommendations that we're making, why we've created the tooling that we've created, and so forth. So let's jump into some of the basics of DNN theming. There you have two basic approaches when you're creating a DNN theme. One, you can base it completely on HTML and use a token-based system, but you could also use ASP.NET web controls, web user controls, and actually use theme objects in there. And if you can see the screenshot on the right, you may find that familiar. For those of you that have delved into theming before, that's made by 10 Pound Gorilla. You can go to their website at 10poundgorilla.com and get to their tools there, and they have a nice reference guide for various theme objects and tokens, but you would see the various usages, whether or not you're using HTML based or ASCX web user control based there. So those are the two basic approaches for creating themes in DNN. So what are the building blocks of DNN themes this day and age? We've got HTML, of course. Usually you're going to have some cascading style sheets with CSS, and you're going to have some form or flavor of JavaScript. This day we most of the time not using pure JavaScript, but usually using some framework on top of that, either jQuery or even a more advanced framework of like Angular or something like that that's going to give you access to those JavaScript functionality. So the old paradigm of theme development is really a manual process, right? We're going to create HTML files or ASCX files, and we're going to put those theme objects in there. We're going to have a CSS file separate that we're going to manage. We're going to have some JavaScript files, and we're going to import, the various libraries that we would want for JavaScript and all that. So it's more of a kind of a bolt-on kind of, I want feature X in my theme, so I'm going to bolt it on in a real kind of basic sort of way and just hook it in and so forth. There are some definite benefits to this approach. One is it's easy to understand. So I wrote the word beautiful here because it's easy to digest. If you're familiar with HTML, you're familiar with CSS, you're familiar with JavaScript, you're going to be able to read that code really well and probably be able to decipher where exactly you need to put something new in or change something. So it's highly configurable this way. We're all used to purchasing a theme on the DNN store. We download it, and we're going to probably have to make some changes, right, in order to implement for that for our website or for a client's website that we're doing. So we download that, we read some instructions for that, and we figure out how we can change this, that, and the other in there. So it's highly configurable. So there's definite benefits to that. So why do we need to change the way that we do things in this? The reason we use it the way that it is it's basic. It's a low barrier of entry for us to understand. It's highly tweakable from an administrative standpoint, and it's incredibly feature rich, right? Most themes today have all kinds of built-in features, be that delivered through some CSS framework like Bootstrap or Materialize or something like that, or it's widget X or widget Y in there for a gallery function, for you name it. They're highly feature rich. So that's why we kind of stick with what we do now. But why do we need to change the way that we do this? Well, one of the most important reasons is it's not really the best practices. And you may say, well, who are you to tell me what's best practice, right? There are ways to do things such that we have performance in mind. And I'm jumping right down to the very end here of my bullet list here, but performance is a big deal, especially in DNN these days. A lot of these themes, unfortunately, are not built with performance in mind. They're built with flexibility in mind, and the tweakability and the features in it, not so much on performance. So when it comes to how many of you have really been asked, by your client or by someone within your organization, if you're running an internal website or something, like, why are our scores on Google PageSpeed Insights not up there? Why are they not the norm, in speed wise? And a lot of times we don't really know, unless we really dig into it. So that is definitely one reason why we should change the way that we think about how we develop the themes, how we tweak themes, and how we ultimately deploy them to our websites. Another reason is to really get on modern dev tooling for this, because the world has changed. We live in a command line world, and we need to really become comfortable with some of the more modern tooling processes and so forth. And we'll go over some of that in more detail a little bit later. We want to have flexibility as a developer. We want to be able to grab the pieces that we want and remove the pieces that we don't need from there. And we want to be highly efficient as developers too. We want this to be a very quick process going through. We don't want to waste a bunch of time trying to just jump around a bunch of hoops and so forth. And we really want to be highly accurate when we're doing so. So what tools are available out there now for meeting some of these needs for us as a modern theme dev? One, there are some theme dev tools that are geared more towards module developers. Many of you may be familiar with Chris Tot templates for DNN module development. So he also supports within those templates a way to build themes there. So if you're a module dev, that may be a good path for you because it will be in the Visual Studio world. And there are some other tools out there similar to that that are more geared towards the module developer that needs to create a theme. There are also some pieces of or partial solutions out there for different pieces. So for instance, let's say you wanted to jump in and you wanted to be a little bit more performance oriented. You can grab some tools to help you to minify your CSS and your JavaScript that you're using in your themes, for instance. And there's solutions out there that'll help you just do those things. But then that brings us to NV Quick Theme. This is a tool, really a framework tooling environment that we have created to help us to build custom themes more effectively, efficiently, and highly performant. And we have open sourced that to the community. As a matter of fact, we have a new release that just released today, release 1.1. You can go out there and get it. We'll go a little bit more in detail how you can get that in a minute. So how do you get it? You can get it through GitHub. It is open source. So you can go to nvquicktheme.com and that will have a link to it to the GitHub repository where you can download it and clone the repository and use it from there. But okay, this sounds great, David, but what do I need in order to really able to understand this? You talked about command line, you talked about, things that are just not in my world. Well, ultimately what you're going to need is Node.js, which is a JavaScript-based server platform, if you will, to do some things. Basically treats your local environment like a server environment. Gives you all sorts of tools. You will need Node Package Manager, which is NPM. You'll need Yarn, which is another package manager that's very similar to NPM. And ultimately, you're going to need Gulp. And you may say, oh man, those are nice, pretty logos, but that scares the mess out of me. I don't really know what all that stuff is, don't know how to install it, and so forth. Well, I'm going to flip over now to some instructions that are going to help you be able to get those quickly and get them on there. If I get my screen up here. Okay, so if you go to nvquicktheme.com, you can click on this button for download NV Quick Theme. That'll take you to the GitHub repository. Once you're at the GitHub repository, you can click on the Wiki tab here. And once you're there, you'll see some beautiful documentation here. We've really taken the time to explain the background of why we created this tool, some of the metrics that we're getting with building themes this way. And over on the right, you'll see a table of contents. The second item on that list is the installation instructions. And the reason I'm taking time to really show you this is because I really don't want you to be scared of these things that we're talking about here, because ultimately, once you get your environment set up, you're only going to be using some custom commands that we have created in the Gulp environment. And TK will go over some of that in a minute in detail. But to get you set up, you just need a Node environment set up. You need NPM, you need Yarn. When you install Node, you get NPM. So there's nothing further to do once you install Node. And then once you have NPM, you can get Yarn. So it's a very simple process, and you really don't need to understand these tools in order to be able to use what we're talking about here today. This is just what's going to be required in order for you to be able to use the Gulp commands that TK will be going over in a moment. Okay, I'm going to switch back over to the presentation here. So how do you set up a custom theme project? We're going to be going over that in detail in a few minutes. And what do you need to know ultimately? I talked about all this other stuff, the node, the npm, and the yarn. Once you get all that, it really is going to come down to a set of commands that we have created here. There's going to be a list of main commands that you're going to be using pretty much all the time. There are some subtask commands that gives you a little bit more granular control over things. And then there's some really detailed process type commands that you may never touch, honestly. But TK will go through some of that stuff regardless to try to help you. Now, the theme that we have, the starter theme, I guess you would really kind of call it, the idea here is that this is a development framework for a thing, to create these custom themes. So really, it's not about downloading our theme that you see running on mvquicktheme.com and manipulating that. It's really giving you a workflow to start from so that you don't have to take all the time to reset up a project every single time you want to create a new theme. You clone our repository and you get it there and you start manipulating it. But you may ask, well, what kind of frameworks are you using and how are you focused on making things highly performant? Well, the frameworks that we utilize in the out-of-box theme here is Bootstrap. We're currently using Bootstrap 4.0 and we are using Font Awesome 3.7. Actually, is it 4.7, TK? I thought it was 4.7, sorry. So we have not made the jump to 5.0 on Font Awesome, but there's just because of the way that they do things is quite different in that. So we're still at 4.7. But what this provides is this is the only bloat, if you will, and I use that a little bit loosely. Bootstrap is an incredible CSS framework, but there's really nothing stop you from using another framework for CSS if you want to. It's just that out of the box, we've got it tapped into Bootstrap and we've got it tapped into Font Awesome, so it gives you immediate access to all the wonderful bells and whistles that come along with both of those frameworks. But that's it. There are no other dependencies we're really bringing in outside when it comes to CSS frameworks and fonts. What other tools are helpful? Well, you've heard a little bit about MV Quick Theme. We also have MV Quick Site, and this will help you get an actual DNN instance up very quickly. Less than a minute, actually, is what we like to say, depending on the speed of your computer. But it is a great tool. It's a Windows Forms application that runs right on your computer and helps you install DNN without having to do that in a manual fashion. You can find that at nvquicksite.com, and that will also link you over to the GitHub repository of that. That is also an open source tool for doing that. So let's see it all in action. What I'm going to do here at this point is I'm going to actually run MV Quick Site here and show you how quickly we can get an environment set up and running here on my local computer. So I have MV Quick Site up and running. You see it here. I'm going to install the latest and greatest version of DNN 9.2.0 here. Well, I'm going to click next. It is actually going to download that package, and I probably should have chosen another one, shouldn't I, Clint? But nonetheless, our internet's pretty good here, so it should be fairly quick. If you already had the package downloaded, it would prompt you and say, do you want to override that local package or you just want to use the local package that you've already downloaded? So you can see that it downloaded fairly quick here. Now it's going to automatically forward and allow us to put in a site name here. So by default, I'm just going to put in my site 5 and we'll leave the TLD to be dnndev.me here. And let's see, I'm going to choose a base folder here. I'll just put it in my C drive and my dev folder here. And it's going to create an install folder there. I'll leave it for the create a custom app pool, and we'll click next. So I do not have that folder already. We're going to say yes to create that folder. Now it's going to ask me about my local SQL Server instance. It has already pre-populated the database name for me based on the site name, and that is the name of my local database server here. And I'm going to use Windows authentication to connect to that. I'm going to click Next, and I get that wonderful little annoying error that comes up, but you can ignore that one. And the demo gods are not smiling on me today here. Interesting. Well, it looks like I have some issues here. In a, how many times has that happened to you, Clint?
Not many.
What I will do here, and I'll try it one more time with a package that's already installed. And if it does not fly, you'll have to take my word for it that it works wonderfully and goes right past that. But I could actually have some database issue here locally. I'm going to try 9.1.1 because I know I have a package already for that. I'm going to fly through here and name it the same. And actually, I'm going to change my base folder here real quick. Okay.
You're getting some good remarks in the questions and answers, and always on the demo.
Yeah, it's always the danger of doing a live demo with something like this. That is absolutely amazing. So I have some local SQL Server issue obviously here, but this would actually go through and it would unpack that installation and actually install it locally, and it would launch the site so it would pick up into the DNN installation, the regular DNN installation process. It's actually quite quick, helps to alleviate a lot of local issues that you may run in to with that. So at this point, I apologize for the issue with NV QuickSight, but we're going to switch over to TK at this point, and he's going to go through some of the tooling for NV Quick Theme. And I will make you presenter now, TK.
Okay. All right. Is that working?
It is.
Visual Studio Code.
Yep, that's right. Should be a blank screen there. All right. So we're going to start off. I've got a fresh DNN install. I have preloaded a little bit of content just to fill out the content panes so we can see that when we're looking at the theme once we put it up there. But other than that, we're kind of starting off where David should have left us off if it hadn't have broken. So here we have our DNN install, and I've actually navigated already into the skins folder under the default portal. And I have also downloaded NV Quick Theme at the master. I went to the GitHub repository for NV Quick Theme, and I clicked download and downloaded that zip file and have it right here for us. So assuming you've already done those starting things that David spoke about, installing Node, installing Yarn, and Gulp. On the global level, you should have your environment ready to go. So downloading this is where you would go next. So we're going to go ahead and extract that here. And we'll just get rid of that too. So at this point, we've got our theme folder here, and we're going to rename this to whatever we want our theme to be. My new theme. All right, and this is what we have. At this point, we're going to jump into Visual Studio Code here. We're going to pull open that same folder, have it set up here, just so we have everything nice and concise. We got our command line here for us. Everything's good to go. All right, changing the folder name is important because that's the name of your project, and we will be referencing that same folder name in here in a moment. But before we do that, we have to initialize all the stuff, all the magic part of this working. Like I said before, this is assuming you got your environment set up correctly and follow those detailed instructions on the wiki. You should just be able to get into your terminal here and type in yarn. And while this is installing our packages, I'll explain what this is doing. We have set up here package JSON and package lock, several different things here that you don't need to worry about. What's going on here is it's taking this detailed information of everything that we need to make these things work, and it is installing those currently as we're talking. You can see down here we got our progress bar. It will pop up with these warnings saying Bootstrap has unmet peer dependencies, but if you read in the wiki as well, we say you can just ignore this. It's talking about some JavaScript that we actually have bundled together, and so it makes that irrelevant. Once this is finished up, you can see here on the left side we got node modules. This is a new folder that just showed up. This is where it is housing everything that is getting downloaded right now. And this is a folder where you're not going to mess with. This is where all the plugins and everything, all the gulp stuff needs to be so it can work, so it can do its magic for us. Once this is finished up, there we go. It's finalizing everything. And we're done. All right, we're good to go at this point. So the first things first, we're actually going to click down to our gulp file.js. Ignore anything from here down. You don't need to worry about that. It looks confusing. You don't need to worry about it. What we're going to focus on are these things right here. This is basically the description of your project. And remember what we called that before was my new theme. It's important that this part is the same name as the folder that it's in if you're working in an actual dev or an actual DNN instance, so that it knows where to put stuff. So we're just gonna look through this real quick, make sure everything's good. Let's be like my new cool theme, and we're gonna save that. Once we've done that, we're ready to initialize our project. And now we're going to use one of those commands that David went over earlier and spoke about. I will go into greater detail of those commands at the end and what exactly they do. But for right now, we're just going to call one of those commands. And this command is gulp build. This manually boots your project, does everything it needs to do to set things up. Because as we all know, containers don't belong in your skin folder. You need them at a higher level. They are right here. So we need to do a few things, and that is one of them, to initialize that. Another thing that this does is it takes this information and it plugs it into your DNN manifest, that important file that tells everything where it needs to install at the end. So we're going to go ahead and run that. It's going to take a few seconds here, and it's going to run through the different tasks it needs to, and we're good to go. It has now taken those containers, put them where they need to be, and we have populated the manifest file. Even though you don't need to touch this, we'll go ahead and take a look at it. You can see it's filled in the different aspects of it where it needs to be. Perfect. All right. At this point, we are good to go. At this point, your theme is at a good starting point. And it's actually at this point, I would recommend you set up some sort of code management system, whether that's GitHub or Bitbucket or something like that. You want to set up your repo at this point, so you got this fresh, ready to go project install, set up your git ignore correctly, everything you need to do, and you'll be ready to go. So now, since we're at a good spot here, I'm going to go through different aspects of what we have here, the layout of NV Quick Theme. Starting off at the top. Actually, we're going to start at the root, sorry. Right here we have several things, some of which don't matter in the end, stuff like any markdown files. That's something from GitHub. It's not really important. They have some information on there, but in the end don't really matter. You could honestly delete those if you wanted to, or just leave them there. But we got our our basic default ASX file and our doc type, several other files that need to be there as well. But we're going to take a look at our default SCX file. This is set up a special way that makes things easier in the long run. We use something that I call partials here, and calls those. That way, if you need multiple templates, you got your home template and you got your inner template or any other amount of templates, You don't have to redo that code over and over again. You don't have to copy and paste it. It just calls these partials. All you would need to do is call that one file, and anytime you needed to change something in that section, you can see under the partials folder, we have those files. So we do basic getting out of the way things first, and also it helps clean up your ASCX file by getting rid of your registers and includes and putting them in their own thing. We have here all the DNN registers, so you can call those as needed. And then we also have our includes. We also do include the DNN meta tag here to make things mobile responsive. We also exclude the DNN default CSS because that is painful. We have here, we got our CSS calls that we're doing, and you don't need to worry about these unless you're doing something custom. These are all set up to work correctly as they are, as well as your JavaScript calls. Next, we'll go back here and you see we got those registers and includes out of the way. And like I said, this really just cleans up the ASCX file, so it's not confusing. You don't have to scroll down through that every time you're looking at it. It's just a couple lines. Next down, we got our header and nav bar area. So our header ASCX file, I keep saying that wrong. Very nice, concise. You can see here you can start seeing some of the bootstrap involved. And when it comes to bootstrap, we're actually not going to delve into bootstrap and what that's like. Bootstrap is very well documented. If you go to getbootstrap.com and click documentation, anything you need there is included there in beautiful detail. So if you need to learn how to use Bootstrap, I recommend going there to look for it. And you can see here we got our, login, user, search. We got our logo. We got our DNN menu. We use the regular DNN menu for this. And yeah, just basically set up very nicely. Moving on, we go to our main content, and this is generally where you're going to have whatever you want in your template. That's not a partial. And even then you could have more partials included in here if you wanted to. If you have a section that you use over and over again in different templates, make it a partial file and include it where you need it. But here you see more basic Bootstrap stuff. We've defined several different panes here, and this actually defines panes based on, we wanted to give someone something to look at. So if you see here, this is our nvquicktheme.com. This is actually the base theme that comes with it. So these content panes are set up exactly like this website. So you can look at this and get an idea of what you're starting with. We wanted to make sure that that was fairly simple, give someone a good example, but not destroy you with a ton of bloat, because you can easily clean this up by deleting what you need or don't want. And then last but not least, we have our footer. Here in the partials footer, same basic stuff. Some Bootstrap, got your copyright terms, privacy, everything you might need in that. All right, moving on from the root folder here, and that's where you would add different templates if you need it. We got our containers folder. Like I said, containers isn't normally in the skin folder, and this actually isn't doing anything for your theme right now. This is just kind of a placeholder. And every time you run that gulp build process, it will re-update that. Now, really quick, I'm going to jump over to a different command that we need to, you'll want to use that will make life really easy for you. We're going to start up another instance of the terminal here for this, because this is going to take up that terminal. It is the gulp watch command. What this does is it watches specific folders and specific files in your theme and recompiles everything as necessary anytime you change that, one of which is the containers folder. So we're going to go ahead and run gulp watch. It'll take a second here to initialize, and then after 0.49 or 492 milliseconds, it is up and watching your stuff. So if we go into here in containers and we change something, we want to add something to the container, and this doesn't make any sense, but we're just going to type something in there and hit save. You'll see that it just started that process that it needed to do to update that, and it automatically sent that where it needed to be in the DNN instance, so that real time you can see that. If we go over here, you can actually see I've pulled up the DNN instance I have created. We're going to go ahead and do a hard refresh real quick to make sure everything's there. Since our project is initialized and ready to go, we should be able to load up that theme. So we're going to go ahead and do that right now. Oh, reload it on me. And log me out. Let's log into our instance here. Give it a second to boot up, and we will go over to themes. All right, you can see here we have my new theme. We can apply that. You can see the container. It's using the none container, which has been populated because we did that initialization with the gulp build. So that is ready to go. So that's on there. And unfortunately, we do have to change our home screen to use that theme because it doesn't do it automatically. Really quick, we'll jump in here and change that appearance to use our new theme using our layout, our default layout, and the none page container. And you'll see here in a second with our content blocks that I have set up earlier to be in the right places. Here we are. It's filled out. That's actually the wrong colors, I believe, because I was messing with this earlier. All right, here we go. You can see that it looks very similar to this because it is literally the exact same thing. I've just filled them out with content blocks. And that's where we're sitting at. So now with our gulp watch, anytime you change something, you can come back here and refresh it and see it change instantly. Well, you'll have, yeah, refreshing it. All right. Back to our structure here, and we'll keep going down the line. Next up, we have our dist folder. Anyone who does modern development kind of knows what this is. And if you don't, it's really simple. This is where it ends. This is where after everything's compiled, everything's brought together, this is the final bit of files you'll have. It's all minified. It's all ready to go. We've got your nasty looking minified files here, but as small as possible. And that's what this folder is. You won't mess with this folder. This folder is a place for that to be stored until you are, for the DNN instance to call on it, so you can see it real time. And as well, when you package it, it will pull from this folder. Next up, we have our docs folder, which is purely just from GitHub. So not very necessary. You can look there, it has information if you need it. You can reference it here instead of looking on the wiki. But if you don't want to clutter your file system there, you can get rid of that. Not a big deal. Next up, we have our menus, and I'm not going to delve into the DNN menu and how to deal with that, but we use the main DNN menu, and we have modified it a bit, and that is where that is located. Very simple structure right here. We set it up within a main folder in case you needed more menus. It's all ready to go, nicely organized. Next up, you'll see the node modules folder, which I mentioned earlier, a folder that you're not going to touch. It has everything in it that gulp needs to work, and if you mess with that and you don't know what you're doing, it's a good chance you'll mess up something that gulp needs. Next up, we have our partials folder, which I mentioned before. And last, but definitely not least, we have our source folder. This is where you'll spend most of your time, is in here, that and the partials folder. I'm going to go through the different aspects or the different parts of this folder because we have it broken down quite a bit. This is by far the most important folder here. First, we have assets. We have taken Bootstrap and we, instead of leaving it as, the smallest possible thing, it eventually goes to the smallest possible thing, as you've seen in the dist folder, but currently we have it exploded out in all its glory. This looks kind of daunting. Don't worry about it unless you want to. This is something that also, like I said, the Bootstrap documentation covers this kind of thing. When you're looking to edit something in Bootstrap, you would come here to change it. All of their variables, everything they have is here. Like I said, this looks daunting, but you don't need to change this unless you're really wanting to delve into it. And Bootstrap has immaculate documentation on that. Moving on, we have the images folder. What this is we actually have a images command that is done in gulp. And this just kind of makes things nice for the user, because a lot of times you'll have, you know, your high-res photos and things that you want to use in a theme or what have you. You can toss it all in here, and when you run a simple command, the gulp images command, oh, we are on my watch command prompt there. If we run gulp images, there's nothing in there currently, so it's not going to come back with anything, but it will compress all those files for you and put them where they need to be in here. There's no images folder currently in dist, but that's because we have no images. It would automatically populate that and keep those lined up for when you package your theme. It will still point to the correct images. Moving on, we have our JS folder here. For our JavaScript, we have our custom JavaScript file. Most of the JavaScript we need is already included in Bootstrap, so we don't probably need anything, but if you need to add any extra JavaScript, that is where you would do it. Our gulp watch here watches that folder as well. Any changes you make will automatically be updated in the dist folder for that file, for those files. The most important, in my opinion, or at least the fun part for me, as we're talking about advanced DNN theming here, is, you know, styling stuff. Now, this is where we delve a bit into Sass. We went with Sass because it's powerful, it's robust, you can do lots of stuff with it, and in the end allows for greater organization. Now, for a lot of people, their experience with DNN theming is downloading a third-party theme, you get it, you find the CSS files that you need, you look through there to find what you need, you find and replace what color codes you want, and all that fun stuff. And a lot of times it's hard to find what you're looking for exactly. The CSS file is chock full of tons of different things, and you have to search down through it or use your inspector to find where it is and go pull up that section. Well, with Sass, it allows us to break these down into smaller files, which makes it easier to find and change what you're looking for, especially when you're the one making it. You'll know exactly where everything is. We have kind of set up a hierarchy here, what we think is a good way to organize things. But if you know what you're doing with CSS or with Sass, you'll be able to go in and change that. If not, don't worry about it. Just use our setup. It's nice. And I'll break it down why we have it the way we have it. First, we have components. This is very in like the bottom part of your theme, like any individual pieces that you'll be using over and over again. You'll see we have forms here. Form something you style, those components, and you want it that way all across your website. But that's the individual component piece. You can see it's empty here, and I'm actually going to use this for some stuff later, but we didn't need to style any forms because Bootstrap actually styles forms very well. So we didn't need to do that. You can see here we have different style sheets for these different things that have several things. I'm clicking through them rather fast because I don't want you to get hung up on what you see there, because some of it looks daunting before I explain to you what's going on in these. But you can see we've broken it down individually. Instead of having one giant CSS file, you have lots of little Sass files. Moving on, we have mixins. Very simply put, these are Sass functions that solve problems for you behind the scenes, and I'll delve into more of that in a minute. Pages, any individual page styling you need, and then sections. Section styling, makes sense. Stuff like your footer and your header, and I use one called banner pane. These are broken down really simply, to anything dealing with your footer or your header or the banner pane or whatever other section you want to make. You can create a new one for a section that you use often and name it what you will. And then last but definitely not least, actually not last, we got our variables here. These are any kind of variables you want, you probably want to put in here. And I'll delve into that in a minute. So I'm going to exit out of that before you focus on that too much, because we're still going down through this. Last but not least, sorry, this is the last, is the base Sass file. This is for all your CSS resets, any kind of baseline stuff you want is right here. I recommend leaving this pretty bare. This is supposed to be, like I said, just your baseline stuff. Anything extra styling on top of these aspects, I recommend putting it in a component or the page it's on, or whatever you feel is best there, but leaving your baseline CSS as minimal as possible to be your base resets. All right, now let's talk a bit more about Sass, and I'll cover in some of these things that I kind of jumped over real fast. I want to touch on Sass quite a bit because this is an advanced look at DNN theming and a core aspect of why we built NV Quick Theme. It allows for rapid CSS development, better organization, and it has a lot of powerful tools at the disposal. And I'll cover some of the aspects. You're obviously welcome to delve more into it. There's plenty of documentation online about Sass and stuff you could learn much more advanced than this, but I'm going to touch on some basic concepts here. First of which, in my opinion, the easiest to learn and the most effective are variables. If we come into our variables folder here, we got colors. You can see here, we're creating some variable and we're giving it some data. And this is used and referenced several times throughout the theme. If we look at our CSS here for, think real quick, look at our header. Here we go. On our header, we want the background color to be this light gray, or our user controls to be this tertiary color. If we go back to our colors variables, we can see we got our light gray variable and what that is, and our tertiary color and what that is. Now this is just referencing it at one point. These colors are referenced all throughout our Sass or CSS even. You don't even have to use Sass for these if you don't want to. You can use base CSS in these Sass folders and it will work just the same. So you can pick and choose what Sass elements you want to use. So let's go ahead. We can pull up our site here and see this color here is our tertiary color. So let's go ahead and change that to something terrible. Let's go make it really noticeable that that has changed. Some really bright green, and we're going to save that. As you can see, our gulp watch notified us that it has changed, and it went ahead and compiled that for us. So now if we go back here, we do our refresh, everywhere that tertiary color variable is called, it will change it to that terrible, terrible green. Yep, there it is. Super bright and terrible. Don't use that color, please. So that's variables in a nutshell. Super powerful, easy to use, prevents the ability to, or prevents you needing to go through and just find and replace a ton of CSS, because you'll only be calling it once, and anytime you need to change that across the board, you just change it at one place. All right, next we're going to go into mix-ins. These are a little more complex, can be very complex, but I'm going to talk about like a basic one here. Mix-ins, like I mentioned earlier, they do quick things behind the scenes that you might need to do a lot in CSS, and it does them for you with one call. With CSS, a lot of times we like to use specific, font size measurements. We like to use EMs or RMs over pixels because it's better across the board for our browsers, correct? Well, we always still have to include that pixel fallback, and that's kind of obnoxious to sit there and type that over and over again. So we got a mix in here, that's font size. You take a size here, and it does some things for us. It declares two declarations for us. It gives us the pixel declaration, and it gives us an REM declaration. This basic one isn't actually used right now. It's there for quick reference for individual components. This one, however, is used. It's a little more advanced. It takes two variables and does some more calculations behind the scenes to come up with line height and margins for whatever you're using this on. If I jump over here to our base Sass file, you'll see I'm calling this mix-in. I'm using one single definition, giving in a couple variables, and in return, when this is compiled, it will spit out all this for us. Whatever that calculates out to be, that's what it'll do. So not only is it saving us time of declaring all these things over and over again, it's doing a bunch of calculations for us consistently across the board, which is very nice, like I said, for consistency purposes. That's all about all I'm going to really delve into with mix-ins, because it can go much more complicated. But if you're interested in getting much more complicated than that, I recommend go looking online for some good documentation on that. Next up, I'm going to go over SAS nesting elements. Like I said, for those of you who are scared of something like SAS, we've tried to take the complexity out of it, make it real simple for you. There's some very simple things, even if it still scares you, that you can use to take advantage of, one of which is nesting elements. I'm going to go over to our forms SAS here because it's blank. Now I'm going to type out something. Let's say we have, I'm going to use anchor tags because that's something that requires some more declarations on it. So we got our anchor tag here. It's going to be a special one. It's going to be a speed bump anchor tag. And we're going to give it some sort of weird definition. So normally, if we wanted to change the hover of this anchor tag and the focus of it, we would need to declare this out. We've got our A speed bump hover and our A speed bump focus. We type all that out and then make it whatever we want it to be. So that's normally how you do that with CSS. With SAS, it allows us, yet again in another aspect, to be very organized and really easy to be specific here. Now, specificity in CSS can be a downfall. We don't recommend nesting much more than 3 or 4 in, but in way of organization, it does make it rather beautiful. So we got our A speed bump here, and we're gonna, we have our normal declaration, but instead of going down to a new line, we are going to nest this. And all we have to do, since it is directly next to that one, it's based off that, we're going to put our @ symbol, and we're going to use our hover, and then we're going to @ focus. And here we can make our declaration. Now, you may be saying, that's really not much less typing than this, but on top of being slightly more efficient, when you're dealing with lots of things and when these get rather complex, you'll find more and more situations where being able to nest things like this make things much easier on you. It's much more organized and will help you keep track of those things and help you in the long run save a ton of time with these kind of declarations. So that's a good example of nesting elements within SAS. And you can do this, I said, down as far as you wanted. The @ symbol makes it a definition of whatever that actually is. If you wanted to do a child element, you would say, a span within that anchor tag would be whatever you want it to be. And this allows you to, like I said, keep it really nice and organized without having to type out everything else, the parent elements, over and over again. Moving on, I think that's all I'm going to talk about with SAS right now, because those are, like I said, I just covered some basic SAS stuff. If you need anything more in depth, I recommend looking online for that. Tons of good documentation for that. But there's some basic SAS concepts. These are things that will save you a ton of time in the long run. And we've made it super easy, excuse me, for you to do that without having to worry about all the complexities of it. Wrapping things up here, I'm going to talk about a few things. Remember, I mentioned SAS gives us some tools that we don't otherwise get to use. Behind the scenes, our gulp process here is doing a lot of stuff. Everyone who's dealt with CSS knows about prefixes. You got your WebKit prefix, you got your Moz prefix, and it is annoying to try and remember where you need to use those to make sure things look consistent across all the browsers. This is happening automatically in our system here. Anytime this, right down here, anytime this goes off and says styles compiled successfully, it has already added those prefixes. You don't need to worry about those. You just type out whatever you want to style, and it adds in those prefixes automatically for you. Then it puts all those files together, all those CSS files together, and minifies them. That's how it ends up here in our disk folder with our styles. Anything you change in your Sass will be updated automatically in this horrific looking file. And that is basically what Sass does for you in our system. I'm going to quickly go over the last little bit here as we're wrapping up is the tasks that I talked about earlier. I'm going to go into a little more in depth with those. If we pull up our wiki here, we have some commands. And I'm going to show you what the package one does here in a second, but I'm going to go over the ones I've already spoken about. Gulp build does a kind of forces mostly everything that happens in Gulp watch and does a few other things. Like I spoke about before, it puts the containers in the correct folder, and it also updates your DNN manifest. The DNN manifest does not update unless you use Gulp build, or it does it automatically when you package as well. Gulp watch does not take care of that. We can look down here, we got tons of subtask commands and process commands. These, like I said, unless you're really delving into Gulp, you don't need to worry about these so much, or less, even if you want, more granular control, you might use that. If you wanted to force your Gulp containers to update, you would run the Gulp containers command and it would do that for you. Otherwise, Gulp build, Gulp watch will take care of pretty much everything that you need to worry about. You have Gulp watch running while you're doing your styling or any kind of changing with JavaScript, and it will keep everything going. You're changing your containers, it will take care of it for you. And that's what Gulp watch does, is it runs several of these commands constantly, watches those folders for you. The last and the coolest one, in my opinion, is the Gulp package command. If we jump back to our instance here, sure, this is all great and everything, but we want to send this to somebody, or we want to install this on an actual DNN instance online. Well, we come here to our command prompt, and we're going to type in Gulp package. This is going to run a series of processing commands that, yet again, unless you're delving into Gulp, you don't really need to worry about. It runs all these things, and it's going to create a build folder here. As you can see here, it creates this folder, and inside will be your nice install zip. This includes everything it needs to be installed in a new DNN instance. You pull this up, you go to your extensions and add a new extension, get this file, it puts everything where it needs to. You didn't have to do anything else to make this happen. Everything goes right where it needs to and looks exactly like, should look exactly like you have it in your environment set up. That is pretty much all I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed that. I think David has a little plug here for you about helping us out with this project, though.
Yeah, thanks, TK. Great job walking through that, and really, really helpful to see all that in action. So I wanted to put a little plug in here. Again, we mentioned earlier that this is an open source project. So we'd like to say that many hands make light work. So if you see an area in which you can improve this solution, please do visit the project at github.com/envisionative/nvquicktheme. And this is in the slide deck, and I think this may be shared in a follow-up blog with this. But please do. I mean, if you can make a contribution to help that would be great. We are actively monitoring those issues that get submitted there and enhancement requests and so forth. Or maybe you just have an idea that you want to put out there and have a conversation in the community. There are quite a few people using this, so it's an active conversation that's going on out there. So at this time, I'll turn it over to any questions and answers and turn it back to Clint here.
Yeah, so definitely appreciate it, David and TK. I just want to let everybody know, I realize we're like 1 minute out from running over time. If you have to go, feel free to go. We are going to post the replay But we're going to stick around. We got some questions that came up. I will say that the hecklers were out in full force today. We got a lot of snide remarks and jokes in the Q&A section, but we'll go through some of these questions as I think they'll be beneficial for people here. So I guess the first one that's a non-heckle question is, with the transition away from page icons in DNN 9, how are you creating a client-friendly dynamic mega menu, additional menu option for NB Quick Theme? And David, you responded to that, and I believe everybody could see it, but do you want to just speak to that in case people weren't looking?
Yeah, sure. And TK, feel free to chime in if there's something that you'd like to add to that. But currently out of the box, what we're using is a lightweight menu called Slim Menu. We purposely chose this one for several reasons, but it's very lightweight. It is in of itself not a mega menu option. So if you do want to implement a mega menu in your theme, that would be up to you to integrate that solution for that. But this gives you a great multi-level normal menu in DNN right out of the box that's very lightweight and fast.
And David, before I get to the next question, one thing that kind of occurred to me is I've seen you tweet and blog and things about the page speed scores that you all are getting with NB Quick Theme. So for the person who's on this webinar and they may be, for example, like me, where I'll just go and copy a skin folder and then I'll paste and go into my CSS, like TK was making me feel bad, right? Like I just go in and start modifying CSS, right? But now, like the way you guys are going about it is like there's an actual build process to this thing. And so some people may sit back and think, why do I need to download all that stuff? Why do I need to learn all these steps and process? Could you speak to some of the benefits that you're seeing with NB Quick Theme and why it would be beneficial or behoove someone to go and learn the steps? Even I know they're not terrible to learn. But I don't know if we stress, the scores you guys are getting enough.
Yeah, and remember, this is not the old paradigm. This is not download a theme and tweak its files and write in your instance. This is really a tooling to create your own theme. We do provide a nice theme out of the box to use, but you're obviously not going to want your site to look like mbquicktheme.com. So you're going to want to kind of follow the process. But as far as the scores and things like that we're getting on Google PageSpeed Insights is pretty impressive for a DNN site. mbquicktheme.com, feel free to run that site on Google's PageSpeed Insights tool, and you'll see that it is getting 93 on desktop out of 100 and 73 out of 100 on mobile. Now, the theme is only one part of the puzzle for scores in Google PageSpeed Insights. It's quite complicated, but your DNN settings matter on that, and also the content that you're putting on there and how you lay out the content and what Google perceives as the right way to do that, especially on mobile. They're quite finicky with that. So, but out of the box, these are getting great scores, and your mileage may vary based on your particular implementation of the theme, but we're doing everything that we can possibly do to help those scores in the base theme.
Right. So I guess the point I was trying to get across is that there are benefits to using these processes in your themes. All right. So the next question was: it seems the drop-down menu push all button on NB Quick Theme is not fully accessible when using the Enter or arrow keys on the keyboard. Any advice to accommodate? David, I see again you answered that one and made the call for open source assistance, right? So,
yeah, and I'll mention there was a couple of questions that were related more to accessibility, and this was just kind of scratching the surface of an issue in particular out of the thing. We didn't develop this with WCAG 2.0 in mind, but that would be a great way for someone to participate in this project to help us with accessibility concerns.
Gotcha. All right, the next question, after you skip all the Will Stroll ones, is the NV Quick Theme is fairly bare bones for included NPM nodes. Are there specific ones you would use in development that you would consider necessary? David, I think you responded.
Yeah, and I think it really depends on the use case and what you're developing for, but we've purposely, again, tried to focus on performance and keeping everything as lightweight as possible. So what widgets and bells and whistles you'd like to add to it are really up to you. The flexibility is there for you to do it, but yeah, right out of the box, we're trying to keep things as bare as possible on purpose.
Gotcha. And then the next one was, around, like you said, accessibility. It says, are the themes being built using WCAG 2.0 consideration? And you're saying that the base theme was not built with that as a consideration, but it absolutely can be. And again, making the call for assistance on GitHub. So someone asked a question, I can specify page-specific CSS, and in my theme files, register client-side files with the Evoke Client Resources Framework, but any suggestions for registering page-specific JS files in Evoke's management/client resource framework? David, what you want to speak to that one?
Yeah, I was actually trying to find that one here.
1236.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, so there are really several ways to do it, but probably the simplest to understand is really to create page-specific themes. So that if you have some special case that you need to adhere to on a particular page, then you would have a theme specific to that page, and you can handle it inside of the theme. What you needed to do for the client dependency framework, for those that don't know what the CDF is, or client resources framework. Another way to do that is really to leverage the DNN API within the theme itself, and maybe perhaps use the page settings of some sorts to indicate something special. And then from the theme, you could dynamically read that and act accordingly. That approach would require a little bit more thought, and it's a little bit more smoke and mirrors, but that would keep you from having to create page-specific themes.
Gotcha. All right. So someone asked if you guys are using a tool for compression to perform what's this lossless or lossy compression. Is there any specific tool you're using for something like that?
PK, I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, the gulp image min is what it is actually using, and just default out of the box, it is lossless. It does have configurations that you can do to change things, and I'm pretty sure you could change that to fine tune it if you wanted to. It does some basic compression off the bat, but may not be up to par with everything else, but it is lossless.
All right, so David, I see you answered this one, but the question was Gulp and Yarn, do they work the same in Visual Studio Pro or Community Editions, or are there packages, in other words?
Yeah, absolutely. You could use Gulp and NPM, and it's Gulp and Yarn, sorry, within the context of Visual Studio. But you may find that for theme development, a lighter weight IDE, integrated development environment, may be better. We like Visual Studio Code, but there's tons of them out there that are more just editor and lightweight and don't have to have all the weight of full Visual Studio.
Yep. All right, someone asked, what version of NPM are you using? They're saying NPM 5 would nullify the need for Yarn altogether, potentially. So are y'all using a specific version of NPM?
Currently, we are not using NPM 5, but we do monitor the progress of NPM 5 and may switch over to that from Yarn at that point. But right now, it really is just using it to get everything set up anyway. So it's really not something that's tightly integrated in the workflow after you get things set up.
Gotcha. I think this next one may be for TK. It says, how are image URLs being handled with Sass?
With that, you would reference it just like you would normally. Like, see here, reference it. Oh, crap. Sorry, it's a great question, and I have it worked out where when it goes to the disk, it pulls it from here. So you're referencing it from the end point. So you would want to do oh, right. Hey, how about that? Sorry. You want to reference it from where it would be in your dist folder. We're assuming you've already compressed your images and they're in the images folder in the dist folder. And so the CSS is in the CSS folder. So any declarations you make in your SAS file need to be to //images/ whatever your image is, because it needs to be relative to where it is in the dist folder.
Gotcha. All right. Yeah, and that may be one of those. It's easier to understand when you actually click in and look at the code, but to articulate it is a little difficult. So another question says, would you recommend a particular workflow if you're also dealing with the skin-related assemblies? This person says they're typically using Visual Studio.
I'm not quite sure how to answer that question. I'm not sure exactly what they're asking.
All right, so I think that was Patrick. Patrick, maybe you can ask it again in a different way, and we'll get to it here in a second. All right, somebody asked about the replay, and that was answered. Should be out tomorrow. If I can get it done today, I might can post a blog today. We'll see. All right, someone says, do you have an article or PDF slideshow about this process? I'm going to guess you guys would point to the wiki on GitHub, but I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah, that's probably the best way to really kind of learn the process is to look at the GitHub wiki. And I will mention here that we are going to be moving it from the wiki to GitHub pages pretty soon and try to evolve out the documentation a little bit more on this, but we're just in process on that. And of course, you'll have the replay of this to see the workflow in action.
Yeah, so this next one is kind of more of a compliment. It says, thank you. I have a team of developers that I want to be able to watch and see this. And that is pretty good. Someone says, what would the process be if like someone worked on a Mac and typically uploaded by FTP? Would the said person need to work through Microsoft Remote Desktop? So if you're doing this on a Mac,
yeah, so I actually do quite a bit of the development on a Mac using MV Quick Theme. The big difference is, of course, you cannot install DNN locally to work with. So at that point, you're depending on the package command that TK went through to actually package the theme up and upload it through the DNN mechanism, or you can set up FTP to do it that way, although I would recommend testing your package because it's a great way to just make sure everything's okay with your package and manifest.
Yeah. Someone makes the comment that says one benefit they can see is definitely the automated generation of the manifest file for installable extension themes. Someone says, can this system be used to create commercial themes? And if so, do you know of any that are already available in the DNN store that can be checked out?
It can absolutely be used to create commercial themes. I am not aware of anyone that's using this to make commercial themes. Again, I think probably the paradigm there shift would be that you're really kind of packaging something that's highly performant but not easily customizable by the end user. So without the workflow, so that may be a drawback for that particular thing.
Gotcha. All right. Someone says, first of all, great tech and presentation. And then they go to a question, is NV Quick Theme only compatible with DNN 9? Apologies if it was covered earlier. So is there a specific version for this?
That is a great question. Out of the box, it is for DNN 9 and up, but that doesn't mean that you cannot do it for pre-DNN 9. You would just need to, obviously the CSS is quite different in older versions of DNN because you have the control panel and the admin experience to deal with, whereas in 9 and forward, we have the persona bar and it's kind of outside of the purview of the theme.
All right, someone asked the question, says, what's the process like for packaging the theme up for installation through the DNN user interface? I assume it's a command line of some kind.
No, actually, the process is exactly the same as it always has been for theme installation. The package command locally creates that zip install package that you can then install just like any other DNN theme.
Yep. All right, someone says, can you recommend a mega menu to layer on this theme? So if you guys had a client and they wanted this theme, but a mega menu, is there a go-to that you have?
Short answer is no. There's so many out there, so many options. It's hard to say because it really depends on the use case.
Gotcha. All right. So this is from Patrick's earlier question. He says he had to step out for a bit and didn't know if he missed a section, but he was referring to a compiled DLL related to the skin, dealing with the skin-based page load and other related tasks. So the earlier question was,
yeah. So the workflow would really be the same. It's just that the development environment the integrated development environment tool that you would probably use is still Visual Studio, full-blown Visual Studio instead of Visual Studio Code. That way you could still compile and so forth, but you would obviously have to modify some of the gulp commands to be able to compile any DLLs that you're creating within that theme package. I know Patrick will understand that response. I'm not sure if that made sense for everybody.
He says he's trying to get familiar with VS Code and catch up with the rest of the world. And so he says, so just port the project over inside of a project and go up from there. Booyah, great job.
That's right.
Well, so, that is all the questions that we have here. So David, TK, again, thanks for rocking this out. One thing we didn't mention is over TK's right shoulder, our left, is the NV Quick Pong table. Anybody who shows up at Envision Native and dominates gets free lessons on the NV Quick themes. Anyways, David,
we get to go to a different kind of school at that point.
Yeah, that is that's where old school is welcome. But anyways, David, TK, again, appreciate the time. Thanks for all the open source contributions you're going from NV Quick site, NV Quick theme, NV Quick everything. We appreciate it, and everyone, thanks for hanging around. And we will post this on online, and everybody can see the replay. So we'll end this one. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Have a good one.